He grabbed her by the throat and slammed her against the wall of her own courthouse. Filthy animals like you belong in cages. She didn't scream, didn't beg, just looked past his shoulder, at the bronze plate above the door, her name, 20 feet away. He laughed, his partners filmed it. Someone said another one who thinks she's somebody. Then they put her in handcuffs and dragged her inside to stand trial. In her own courtroom, in front of her own bench. And for 47 minutes, it worked exactly the way he planned. Until Frank opened the door and said 8 words that stopped every heart in the building. All rise. The Honorable Judge Diana Caldwell, presiding. The man who put her in handcuffs was still in the room. She almost wore the robe, 3 years, her name on the bronze plate above the door. And she almost didn't make it through that door at all. That morning, Diana Caldwell stood in front of her closet for 4 full minutes. The black robe hung on the left. The navy blazer hung on the right. Her hand moved toward the robe out of habit. The kind of habit that lives in your muscles before your brain catches up. 23 years of the same motion, the same morning, ASS building, waiting at the end of the same drive. Then she remembered. Today was her mother's day. Not a birthday. Not an anniversary of anything good. Just the day, every year, when Diana drove to the cemetery on Whitmore Road and sat by a headstone that read Eleanor May Caldwell, 1941 to 2009. She carried us all. She never did that in the robe. She never went in as a judge. She went there as a daughter. The only version of herself that no courtroom court, no title, 2 decades of federal service had ever touched or changed or asked anything of. So she grabbed the blazer. Navy blue, simple cut. A cream blouse underneath. Her small pearl earrings, not the ceremonial ones. The ones her mother had pressed into her palm the morning she passed the bar exam. Her mother had said nothing when she gave them. Just pressed them in and closed Diana's fingers around them like a secret between the two of them that didn't require words. She stood in the mirror for a moment. Just a woman, 54 years old. A little tired around the eyes. Going to work, she picked up her briefcase, walked out the door, and drove toward the courthouse. 1 blazer instead of 1 robe. That was all it took. The drive took 19 minutes. Diana had done it so many times, the route had disappeared into her body. The same streets, the same lights, the coffee place on the corner of Aldrich and 5th that she'd been meaning to try for 3 years. He's always thought about it when she passed and then forgot about it by the time she arrived. The same parking garage entrance, with the same slight dip in the pavement that always made her coffee slide if she'd set it in the cup holder wrong. The same attendant, a man named Pete, who had worked that booth for at least 9 years, who gave a small nod every morning. Today he gave her a slightly longer look. She thought nothing of it. She pulled her briefcase from the back seat, slung the strap over her shoulder, and walked toward the main entrance. The morning air was cool. October in this part of the country had a quality that was hard to name precisely. Not cold enough for a coat, just enough to remind you that warmth was borrowed time and the loan was coming due. Her breath was faintly visible. The leaves on the 3 oak trees lining the courthouse had just gone full gold, the kind of gold that looks like something out of a painting and only lasts about 10 days before it turns brown and falls. She was thinking about flowers, yellow ones. Her mother had liked a specific kind she'd never learned the proper name of. Her mother would point at them in the grocery store near the door, the display that got restocked on Fridays, and say, "Those ones, baby, those are the ones." Diana had spent 32 years buying them by pointing. The cashier always looked up the code without asking what they were called. She was thinking about that, about pointing at flowers and not knowing their name, about being someone's daughter first before anything else. Before the degree and the bar exam and the appointment and the 23 years of cases and rulings and the name on the bronze plate. She was not thinking about Officer Ray Kowalski, but he was already thinking about her. Kowalski had been at the courthouse since 7:15. He liked coming in early, liked The quiet of the building before the lawyers arrived, with their rolling briefcases and their particular brand of self-importance that came from billing in 6-cent increments. Liked standing near the front entrance with a cup of coffee from the machine on the first floor, watching the street outside fell, feeling like the morning belonged to him before it had to be shared with anyone. Today, the morning did not belong to him. At 6:49 a.m., his phone had buzzed on the nightstand while he was still in the parking garage elevator, and he'd seen the notification from his department email and felt his stomach drop before he even opened it. 3 lines. The kind of email that doesn't need more than 3 lines to ruin a career, or at least the part of a career that felt like it was finally going somewhere. Evidence Suppression Case Number 2024 CR0847. As per Judge Caldwell's ruling issued Thursday, all evidence gathered under Warrant 2024 W1193 has been deemed inadmissible due to procedural violations during the search. The case against defendant Torres has been dismissed with prejudice. 8 months. 8 months of work. Surveillance. Informant management. 3 separate warrant applications before he got the one that cleared. The Torres case was supposed to be the one. The kind of arrest that follows you through the rest of your career in the good way. The kind that gets mentioned when people are listing your accomplishments. He had let himself think about it just once. The way you think about something you're not quite ready to say out loud. A commendation. A mention in the departmental newsletter. Maybe at the outside edge of the possibility, a bump on that would change his pension numbers by enough. Gone. Because of a ruling from a judge whose face he couldn't have picked out of a lineup. A procedural violations that sounded to him like a technicality dressed up in Latin. A piece of paper that said 8 months meant nothing, and the man he'd put 18 months of effort into building a case against was walking out of a holding facility sometime this week. He'd read the email 3 times standing in the parking garage. Then he'd walked into the building and gotten his coffee and taken up his usual position near the front entrance and spent 40 minutes trying to put it somewhere he could function around it. By 8:30, he had mostly managed. By 8:45, Diana Caldwell was walking toward him on the block sidewalk outside the main entrance, and his morning's taught at a target for everything it had been carrying since 6:49. He didn't know who she was. That was the truth. Simple. Devastating in hindsight. He had testified in her courtroom 11 times over 5 years. He had stood at that witness stand and addressed her as Your Honor, and answered her questions, watched her face when she delivered rulings that affected his cases. In all that time, 11 times, he had only ever seen her in the robe, behind the bench, in the frame that told him everything he needed to think before she opened her mouth. The frame that said judge and authority and someone he needed to perform correctly in front of. Out here on the sidewalk, in October light, in a navy blazer with a cream blouse and small pearl earrings, she was none of those things to him. She was just a woman. Walking toward the main entrance without stopping at the security checkpoint the way visitors were supposed to stop, the way the signs clearly indicated. The way Kowalski, standing right there, with nothing else demanding his attention, noticed immediately. He moved. He told himself it was protocol. That was what he told himself in the moment and would continue telling himself for some time afterward, in the way that people who are doing something they half know is wrong construct a narrative that makes it feel like a policy. He was maintaining security at a federal courthouse. He was doing his job. He was being professional. He moved toward her and said, loudly enough that a woman with a visitor badge on the steps turned to look, loud enough that a lawyer coming out of the building paused for a half-second before continuing down the steps. "Hey, stop right there." Diana stopped. She turned, looked at him. Her expression was calm in a way that should have communicated something to him if he'd been paying a different kind of attention. The stillness of someone who has spent a long time practicing being calm in exactly the situations where calm is hardest to maintain. Not the stillness of someone who has nothing to worry about. The stillness of someone who has decided that her reaction in this moment is going to be controlled regardless of what she's feeling underneath it. "Good morning," she said. "Identification," Kowalski said. "This is a restricted federal building. You can't just walk through that entrance without stopping at the checkpoint." Diana set her briefcase down on the step below her, reached into her jacket pocket with her right hand. "I have my credentials right here. If you'll just give me a moment." "Step back from the door." She paused. "I'm sorry?" "I said step back. Move away from the entrance." She looked at him for a moment. Beat longer than would have been comfortable. Not long enough for him to call it confrontational, but long enough for her to have taken a full breath and made a decision about how the next 30 seconds would go. She stepped back. "I work here," she said. Her voice was level, measured in a way that was not conciliatory and not aggressive, just precise. "I have identification. I was reaching for it when you asked me to stop. If you'll allow me to finish." "What kind of work?" Not a question the way it was phrased. The phrasing of a man who has already settled on an answer and is waiting for the other person to confirm it or give him a reason to move to the next step. "What do you do here? In this building?" "What kind of work?" And there it was. Diana heard it. Not in the towards themselves, but into space around them. In the quality of the pause before he asked. He's in the way his eyes had moved when she stepped back, taking in the blazer, the briefcase, the pearl earrings, and arriving at a conclusion that had nothing to do with any of those things and everything to do with something he was carrying into this morning from 6:49 a.m. and probably from much further back than that. She recognized it the way you recognize a change in weather before the change is visible. Something in the pressure. Something in the temperature of the air between them. "I'm a judge," she said. Quietly, without emphasis, just the fact stated plainly. Kowalski looked at her, at the blazer, at the briefcase on the step, at the pearl earrings. His eyes did the thing that eyes do when the brain behind them is rejecting incoming information, but because it doesn't fit the story already assembled. He smiled. Not a good smile. The smile of a man who thinks he's seen force before. "Sure you are," he said. What happened in the next 4 minutes was recorded by 6 separate cameras positioned at intervals along the main approach and entrance of the courthouse. Diana knew about the cameras. She had known about them since the security upgrade 4 years ago. She held on to that knowledge the way you hold a railing in the dark, not because it makes the dark less dark. Because it means you know where the wall is and the wall is still there even when you can't see it. Kowalski asked for her ID again. She reached for it again. He told her to stop reaching. She said she was retrieving her identification, which was what he'd requested. He said she was making sudden movements. She said she was not. He said she was raising her voice. She was not raising her voice. He stepped closer. Things happened fast after that. The open palm connected with the side of her face hard enough that her head snapped to the right and she lost a full second to white. Nothing but her own pulse, very loud, very present, and then the sound of papers and the briefcase hitting the steps and scattering, the documents she'd packed that morning sliding across the stone. Then his hand was at her throat. The stone wall of the courthouse pressed cold through blazer and her blouse and against her shoulder blades. "Filthy animals like you," he said. "Close. Very close. Belong in cages, not courthouses." Diana did not look at him when he said it. She looked past him, past his shoulder, up and to the right, at the bronze plate above the main entrance, 20 feet away from where she was standing with his hand around her throat in front of her own courthouse. The Honorable Judge Diana Caldwell. Presiding, she read it twice, slowly. The way you read something you've walked past us 10,000 times and stopped really seeing, and now you need to see it again, clearly, as if for the first time, as a reminder of something that is still true regardless of what is happening to your body right now. Don't break. Not here, not yet. The handcuffs went on, metal, cold. The officer applying them did it with more pressure than was necessary, the ratchet clicking tight against her wrists. She could hear Reeves and Simmons behind her. She couldn't see them, but she could hear them. Low voices, and then a sound that was unmistakable. Laughter. The specific kind of laughter that only happens when men feel completely insulated from consequences. She said nothing. She let them walk her up the remaining steps and through the entrance of her own courthouse and did not say a single word. The building felt different from this angle. That was the first thing she registered when they brought her inside. 23 years she had walked through those doors, and the building had felt like something close to home. The fluorescent light in the hallway near room 7 that had been flickering for 3 years and that she kept meaning to report. The coffee on the floor that was better than the coffee on the first, because someone had replaced the machine 2 years ago and nobody had gotten around to replacing the one downstairs. The clerk named Bernie, who said good morning. Judge Forge befeed she'd cleared the security threshold every single morning, a small ritual that she had never knowledge out loud, but had noticed every time. Today, Bernie looked at her and then looked away. She understood immediately. He didn't recognize her. Or he almost did, and this almost was doing something confusing to him that he didn't know how to navigate. She was in handcuffs. People in handcuffs don't belong to the category of people you make eye contact with or say good morning to, not in this building, not in any building where Bernie had worked. They took her to room 4B, not her courtroom. Her courtroom was on the 4th floor, large and high-ceilinged, with windows at ease on each side that let in good morning light, and a bench that she had sat at long enough to have worn a faint mark on the left armrest where her elbow rested when she was reading. Room 4B was on the 2nd floor. Smaller, lower ceiling, used for arraignments, minor hearings, overflow on the busy weeks. The kind of room that get the cases that don't need much space. Plain walls, fluorescent lighting without the tall windows, 3 rows of gallery seating that always felt like too many for the proceedings that happened there. She had assigned cases to this room hundreds of times. She had walked past its door without going in more times than she could count. She had never been inside the handcuffs. They sat her at the defendant's table. The defendant's table. Diana Caldwell sat at the defendant's table, in a room she had jurisdiction over in a courthouse where her name was on the wall, and looked at her hands, folded in her lap, and breathed slowly and thought. She thought about the first day she had walked into a law building as someone who belonged there. 22 years old. First day at the DA's office. A security guard had stopped her at the door, asked if she was there for the cleaning staff interview. Yeah. She had been wearing a blazer. She had her law school ID in her pocket. She had said, simply and without elaborating, "No, I'm here for the DA's office." He'd looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a man's revising something. Then he stepped aside without apologizing or acknowledging that the question had been asked. She'd walked in, swallowed the thing that rose in her throat, the hot and complicated thing that had no single clean name, and kept walking. She had been swallowing things like that for 32 years. Today at the defendant's table, the swallowing was harder. But she was 32 years better at it than she used to be. She waited. Judge Edmund Price came in at 9:15. She knew Price by reputation more than by personal acquaintance. Civil division, contract disputes, property matters, the quieter end of the legal spectrum where the stakes were financial rather than personal, and the proceedings rarely attracted any public interest. He was 64 years old and had the manner of a man who had spent a very long time in rooms where he was the most important person present, and had quietly, without meaning to, begun to mistake that for a personality trait rather than a circumstance. Not unkind. She'd never heard anything unkind about Price. Just certain. The particular certainty of someone who has not been seriously challenged in a very long time, and has therefore not had recent occasion to discover the limits of what he knows. He came in without looking at the defendant's table, set his papers down, adjusted his glasses, spoke briefly to the clerk about something administrative. Then, only then, glanced toward where Diana was sitting. Something crossed his face, fast. She caught the edge of it and couldn't name it precisely, but it was there, and then it was gone, and he looked back at his papers. "We're on the record," he said, "while the matter of People versus Jane Doe pending identification." Officer Kowalski, you may proceed. Kowalski stood. And here was the thing that Diana noted from the defendant's table, noting it with the part of her brain that had spent 2 decades evaluating testimony. He was good at this. Not extraordinary, not brilliant, but practiced and smooth in a way that came from doing the same thing many times and receiving positive reinforcement for it. His voice had exactly the right quality. Confident, not arrogant, concerned, but not dramatic. The voice of a man telling the truth, because he was constitutionally the kind of man who told the truth, the voice that said, "I have no reason to lie and even less reason to embellish." "Your Honor," he said, "at approximately 8:47 this morning, I was conducting routine security protocols at the main entrance of this courthouse when I observed a subject attempting to enter through a restricted access point, without stopping at the required checkpoint. The subject was dressed in a manner inconsistent with court personnel or authorized legal representatives. She was carrying what appeared to be official court documents that she could not readily account for, and she became verbally aggressive when I approached to inquire." He paused. Just long enough. The pause of a vame has learned where the pauses go. When I attempted to verify her identity and direct her to the proper security checkpoint, she resisted lawful direction. She became physically combative. I was required to use minimum necessary force to ensure public safety and maintain the security of this federal facility. Price nodded with the gravity of a man processing important information. "And the documents she was carrying? They appear to be authentic court files, Your Honor. Case materials with judicial letterhead and case numbers. Sensitive materials. We believe she may have obtained them through improper means and may have intended to use them to access restricted areas of the building." And she offered no identification. She claimed to have credentials, but became agitated and began making statements about her statuses when asked to comply with standard verification procedures in a lawful manner. It's a pattern I've encountered before in my 15 years of service, as Your Honor. Individuals who have rehearsed a particular narrative will often invoke a claimed identity or status when confronted, specifically because they know it creates complications and redirects attention from the actual subject at hand. Diana watched Price absorb this, watched him lean forward slightly, in the way that people lean forward when a story is confirming something they already suspected was probably true. "And in your professional assessment," Price said, "the individual's behavior was consistent with an attempt to fraudulently access a federal facility." "Yes, Your Honor, entirely consistent." Reeves stood next. Same language, nearly, verbally aggressive, physically combative. Refused to comply with lawful direction. Officer Kowalski demonstrated remarkable professionalism in a difficult and unpredictable situation. Simmons followed. The documents she'd been carrying had restricted markings, case numbers, sensitive judicial information that no member of the general public should have had access to. Price looked intrigued. "This suggests possible impersonation of court personnel, identity fraud. We can't rule it out, Your Honor," Simmons said. "The materials she had were very specific, very official-looking." "Your Honor," Kowalski said, picking back up with the smooth transition of someone who has done this particular handoff before. "In my experience, individuals who attempt this kind of access generally do so with materials they've either stolen or fabricated. When confronted, the immediate move is always to claim a position of authority, to say they're someone important, to make the officer questioning them feel like he's the one who has made an error." He let a small, patient smile cross his face. "I've been doing this for 15 years. I know what that looks like." He turned and looked directly at Diana. Full eye contact. Comfortable. The eye contact of a man who feels he occupies the correct position in the room and in the situation. "People who genuinely belong in places like this don't have to insist on it," he said. "They just show their credentials and walk in. It's don't belong who make a performance of belonging." Prosecutor Claire Ashton added from the state's table, in the tone of someone adding what she considered a professional observation. "The state would recommend proceeding with charges of trespassing, resisting arrest, and assault on a law enforcement officer, Your Honor. The defendant's behavior this morning was clearly documented, and the evidence is straightforward. Price began writing. Diana looked at the narrow window on the far wall, high up near the ceiling, the kind that lets in a strip of sky, but no particular view. The sky outside was the gray of an October morning that couldn't decide if it was going to give any sun. She thought about the cemetery on Whitmore Road and whether the groundskeepers had gotten the edge of the grass right this year, along the left side of her mother's stone. They never quite got it. She had never said anything because it felt wrong to complain about the grass at a cemetery, she thought. Not yet. Wait for the right moment. You'll know it. Does the defendant wish to make a statement? The question from Ashton came with a specific intonation. The intonation of a formality being completed, a box being checked, a step in a procedure that would move forward regardless of how the box was filled in. Yes, Diana said. The word came out at the same volume as everything else she'd said. No more, no less. But it landed in the room with a different weight than Ashton had been expecting. Ashton looked up from her notepad. Diana stood, both hands still cuffed in front of her. She stood the way she stood, at her own bench, with her full height, her full attention on the room, her voice ready. Thank you, Your Honor. Her voice went out to every corner of the room without apparent effort. The trained projection of someone who understood that how you fill a space with sound is part of how you fill it with authority. I'd like to address several factual inaccuracies in Officer Kowalski's testimony, if the court will allow. Something changed in the room, not anything visible. Just a subtle shift in the quality of attention, like a temperature drop that nobody has measured, but everyone has felt. Price blinked. You may proceed. Officer Kowalski stated that I was attempting to enter through a restricted access point without following proper procedure. I was walking on a public sidewalk, approaching the main entrance of this federal courthouse during regular business hours. The entrance I was approaching is the standard public entrance, designated for all personnel, attorneys, and authorized visitors. It is not a restricted access point. I have entered through that door every working day for 23 years. Small silence. Price's pen had stopped moving. He stated that I was dressed in a manner inconsistent with court personnel. I'm wearing a navy blazer, a cream blouse, and dress trousers. I'd note that the standard for what's considered inconsistent appears to vary depending on who's being assessed. Ashton's frown had appeared. Not the frown of someone hearing an outrageous claim. The frown of someone who is recalibrating. Officer Kowalski stated that I refused to produce identification. I attempted to produce identification twice. Both times, before I could complete the action, I was instructed to stop reaching. The instruction came before the identification was accessible, not after. Diana's voice remained exactly level throughout, not louder on the points she wanted to emphasize. Louder wasn't necessary. Precision was. He stated that I became physically combative. I did not become physically combative. The security cameras positioned along the main approach to this entrance recorded the full encounter from multiple angles. So did the body cameras worn by the officers present. I am confident that footage exists and is currently preserved on the reference systems, and I am requesting this court issue a formal preservation order for all electronic surveillance devices captured between 8:45 and 9:15 a.m. this morning. That includes courthouse security camera footage, officer body camera recordings, and any recordings made on personal devices by any officer present at the scene. Ashton was on her feet. Objection, Your Honor. The defendant cannot make unilateral evidentiary demands without legal representation. This is procedurally irregular. Diana looked at her with an expression that was entirely calm and not particularly interested in the objection. The right to present a defense is guaranteed under the Sixth Amendment and does not require representation to invoke. The obligation to preserve potentially exculpatory evidence is established under Brady v. Maryland and does not require a defense attorney to trigger. I'm invoking both simultaneously if that's efficient. The court reporter's fingers stopped. For approximately 2 seconds, they seemed so stumpable. Then they started again. Price cleared his throat. Miss. He looked down at his papers, where no name had been noted because no name had been officially confirmed. The defendant. You appear to have some familiarity with legal procedure. Some, Diana said. The word was entirely neutral. She gestured toward her briefcase on the evidence table, her papers gathered and placed there after being collected from the courthouse steps. Those documents are authentic court materials. Pending case files, judicial memoranda, administrative correspondence from this courthouse. I have legitimate professional access to all of them. I was scheduled to be present in this building at 9 a.m. this morning for official business. I have documentation confirming that schedule. She reached carefully into her jacket pocket with both hands and withdrew a leather credential wallet. She held it up and opened it. The gold judicial seal caught the overhead fluorescent light. From the bench 20 feet away, Price could see it. From Ashton's table, the seal was visible. Reeves and Simmons, and near the door at the back of the room, could see it. The 2-inch gold-embossed seal of the federal judiciary with the district designation below it and a name on the identification card beneath the seal. Price stared at it. Then he stared at Diana's face. And then he stared at Frank Okafor. Frank had entered the room 3 minutes ago. He was standing near the back wall, very still, in the posture of a man who has arrived somewhere and found a situation he was not prepared for. He was looking at Diana, not at the credential wallet, at her face, at the bruise on her left cheek that had deepened from the first flush of impact to something darker and more settled. Frank's expression was not confusion. It was not uncertainty. It was recognition. Total, complete. The recognition of a man who had said good morning to someone every working day for 12 years and was now looking at that person in handcuffs at a defendant's sudden table and understanding with complete and sudden clarity exactly what had happened this morning and what it meant. Price's throat moved. I believe, Diana said, and her voice had the particular quality it got when a courtroom had drifted somewhere it shouldn't be and needed to be redirected. The quality that said, I am not asking a question. I am stating the direction we are going now. There has been a significant misunderstanding this morning about the identity of the individual Officer Kowalski detained. I would suggest a brief recess to allow for proper verification of credentials. She didn't lower the wallet. She held it at the same level, steady, the seal visible to everyone in the room. Price picked up the gavel. 15 minutes, he said. His voice had changed. Something had gone out of it. Court is in recess. The gavel came down. At the back of the room, in the last row of the gallery, a young woman in a gray blazer clicked her pen and very quietly closed her notebook. Dara Wynn was 24 years old and 8 months into her internship at the courthouse. She had come into room 4B at 9:20 because the intern office, where she was supposed to be finishing a filing summary, was too loud. Her desk neighbor listened to true crime podcasts without out headphones and had started a second episode before 9A. Room 4B was quieter, and she knew it was used for minor hearings, the kind that wouldn't require her to be officially present or explain herself if someone noticed her. She had not been paying attention to the arraignment at the front of the room. She was 4 pages into a 50-page summary document when she heard the voice from the defendant's table. She looked up without deciding to. There was a woman at the table, in handcuffs, with a bruise forming on her left cheek, speaking in a voice that Dara's brain reached toward and grabbed Edld before Dara's conscious mind had finished processing why. She had heard that voice in 47 courtroom sessions since the start of her internship. The cadence of it. The way it didn't rise to make its points. The way it moved through a complicated sequence of information without losing the thread or losing the room. She had heard that voice say, "You may proceed, and I'll hear the objection." And we're adjourned at the end of sessions where important things had been decided. Dara's hand went to her phone under the table. She opened her messages and found Frank Okafor's name. Frank was 61 years old and had been working this building since before Dara was in high school. He knew every room, every door, every face that belonged in the building, every face that didn't. She typed, "For BB, right now." She sent it and put the phone away and looked back at the front of the room. The woman at the defendant's table had stopped speaking. She was looking at the narrow window near the ceiling, the one that showed a gray sky. Something about the way she was sitting stopped Dara from looking away. She had her hands folded in her lap, the handcuffs linking her wrists together, and she was sitting completely straight and completely still. Not the stillness of someone who has given up. The stillness of someone who is waiting for something they know is coming. Like someone who has already decided what the next first hour looks like and is simply letting the clock get there. Dara had spent 3 years studying law. She had 3 more ahead of her. She would spend 30 years after that in various rooms where important things were decided about the lives of people who had less power than the people deciding. She would never, in all of that time, forget the way Diana Caldwell sat in those handcuffs. The recess cleared most of the room. Ashton stayed at the state's table, not collecting her papers anymore, just sitting. Kowalski moved to the far corner with his lawyer, a man named Garrett, who had arrived 12 minutes ago, looking like someone who had pulled away from something else and hadn't yet been briefed on why. Price had disappeared into the small chamber attached to room 4B. Frank Okafor was already gone. He had read Dara's message from the hallway outside and walked into the room and taken approximately 4 seconds to understand what he was looking at. Then he had turned around and left at a pace that a 61-year-old man with a knee that had been bothering him since August didn't normally maintain. He went up the back stairwell, 3rd floor, storage room 3C, where certain items belonging to the judges were sometimes kept between hearings and ceremonies. He had a key. He used it. The garment bag was on the rack on the left side of the room, hanging where it had been since Diana had left it 3 weeks ago after the judicial ceremony for the new federal courthouse wing. He took it off the rack. On the shelf above, the wooden box he'd seen many times without ever opening. He opened it now. The gavels was inside. He recognized it. He'd seen her use it on days that seemed to mean something, days when the room needed to understand what it was in the presence of. He took it, closed the box, took the stairs back down, 9 minutes total. He knocked on the door of the room where Diana was waiting. She opened it immediately. She'd been standing near it, ready. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Your Honor." His voice broke on the second word. Just slightly. Not enough to be dramatic, just enough to be true. She reached for the garment bag. "Thank you, Frank." "Judge Williams, He caught himself. 23 years of good morning, Judge Caldwell, and he'd called her by a different name entirely under the pressure of the moment. He shook his head. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I wasn't at the front entrance this morning. I was covering the loading dock for the first hour because Henderson called in sick, and by the time I came up front, you were already inside, and I didn't." Frank. She said his name the way she said things in a courtroom, when she needed someone to hear her, and only her. "You didn't do this. You didn't do any of this." I know, but if I'd been at my post, you're here now," she said. "That's what matters. That's the only part I need from you." He turned to face the wall. She unzipped the garment bag. He listened to the familiar sounds of the ritual he witnessed from a distance. So many times he could have described every step with the robe, the particular sound of the fabric, the small adjustments, the moment of stillness after everything was settled that lasted 2 or 3 seconds before she was ready to move. Frank, he turned. She was standing in the full judicial robe. Zap black with gold trim at the collar and cuffs, the gavel in her right hand. The bruise on her left cheek had gone from red to a settled purple-blue under the fluorescent light in the small room. She had not covered it. She had not attempted to minimize it. It was there. It was evidence. It was going to stay exactly where it was. Frank Okafor had been working in courthouses for 12 years, And in this building for all of those 12 years, and in his considered opinion, standing in storage room 3C on the third floor, Diana Caldwell in full judicial robes with a bruise on her face and a ceremonial gavel in her hand was the most formidable thing he had ever personally witnessed. "When we go back in," she said, "I need you to announce me properly." He straightened, both shoulders, the posture of someone taking on a responsibility. "Yes, Your Honor. How would you like to be announced?" Diana Caldwell looked at him for a moment. The calm on her face was not the calm of someone who is not feeling anything. It was the calm of someone who has decided how this goes. The Honorable Judge Diana Caldwell, presiding. She walked to the door and opened it. The hallway of her courthouse stretched out ahead of her. Same marble floor, same overhead lights, same doors she had walked through 10,000 times in 23 years. She walked toward room 4B. She didn't hurry. She had never needed to hurry in this building. The building had been waiting for her for 23 years, and it could wait another 60 seconds. Frank Okafor had been announcing judges for 12 years. He knew exactly how to make his voice fill a room. He understood the difference between the volume required for a courtroom that was fully attentive and one that needed to be brought to attention. He had developed, over a long time, the ability to land specific words with specific weight, to make the formal language of the court feel like sexant time it was said, rather than becoming wallpaper through repetition. But when he opened the door to room 4B and drew breath and said the words, something happened that he hadn't engineered and couldn't have planned. His voice came out different from how it normally came out. Not louder, just truer. Like the words had earned a different register this time because of what they actually meant in this particular moment, in this particular room. All rise. The sound of chairs, the shuffle of bodies moving upward, the automatic physical response of people who had spent courtrooms. That's standing when those two words were spoken had become something they did before they consciously processed hearing them. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Diana Caldwell presiding. The silence that fell after those words was not the normal working silence of a courtroom between one thing and the next. It was the silence of a room that has just absorbed something it wasn't prepared for. The specific frozen quality of the half-second between lightning and the thunder that follows. The moment when you know something has fundamentally changed, but your brain is still in the process of catching up to what that change means and what it requires of you. Ray Kowalski was leaning against the prosecutor's table, arms crossed, the posture of a man who has performed well and is now in the comfortable downswing of the adrenaline that performing well produces. He had been sentenced with Reeves about something. A small professional postmortem, some observation about the proceeding. And his mouth was still open with the shape of an unfinished word when Frank's announcement moved through the room. The coffee cup in his hand lowered. Slowly, Edmund Price had emerged from the small attached chamber and was in the process of returning to the bench, papers under his arm, moving with the confident momentum of a man resuming a proceeding that was nearly finished. He stopped moving, completely, both feet planted, papers still under his arm. Claire Ashton looked up from where she'd been sitting at the state's table, still, hands flat, going nowhere. She looked up at Frank, then toward the chamber door. Darwin, still in the back row where she'd been since before the recess, closed her pen carefully inside her notebook and did not move. Then Diana Caldwell walked through the judge's chamber's door. Not the main door. Not the door they'd brought her through when she was in handcuffs. Through the door connected to the judicial corridor behind the bench, the door requiring the electronic key card she had used 10,000 times. The door that opened only for court personnel with proper authorization. The robe settled around her as she moved. Black with gold trim at the collar and cuffs, falling to the floor, moving with a weight and authority that came partly from the fabric and partly from the person wearing it, and mostly from 23 years of what that robe represented in this building and in this woman's life. She walked to the bench. She sat down, her bench. The bench with the faint mark on the left armrest, where her elbow rested when she was reading a long document. She placed the ceremonial gavel in front of her, folded her hands, and then she looked at the room, all of it, slowly, the way she always began a session, the long reading of the room that told her what she needed to know about who was present and what they were bringing with them. The bruise on her left cheek was visible. It had deepened during the process, settling from the initial red of impact to a defined blue-purple under the courtroom lighting. It sat on her face like a fact. She had not done anything to address it. She would not. It was evidence, and it was hers, and it was going to stay exactly where it was for everyone in this room to see. Price was still standing. He had the look of a man trying to identify the exact moment in the preceding hour when the situation had passed the point of recovery. Diana watched him work through it and felt something that was not quite pity and not quite satisfaction. "Judge Price," she said, "thank you for your management of this matter during my unexpected absence this morning. You may return to your own docket." He opened his mouth, closed it. "Judge Caldwell, I wasn't informed." "I understand," she said, without heat, without the edge that the words could have carried if she'd chosen to put it there. "The misunderstanding this morning did not originate with you. You may go." He went. Quickly, with his papers, with the particular efficiency of a man who understood that leaving was the correct move and was not going to delay it. His robe moved behind him as he cleared the doorway, and Diana watched it go and thought about the conversations Price was going to have with his own conscience tonight, decide that was between him and his conscience. She turned to the room. Kowalski had not moved from the position he'd been in when she entered. The coffee cup was now at an angle that suggested he'd stopped being aware it existed. His face had gone through a progression she had watched happen in real time. The confident red of a man sentence who'd been interrupted. Then the white of recognition arriving suddenly. Then the gray of understanding fully what recognition meant and what it was going to cost him. He was still on gray. His face hadn't found its way to a different color yet. "Officer Kowalski," she said. "You may remain standing." She did not begin immediately. She poured water from the carafe into the glass on the bench. She arranged the folder Frank had included with the robe. She opened her case notes and reviewed the top page, not because she needed to review it, but because the courtroom operates at the pace the judge sets, and she was setting this one deliberately, without hurry, without any indication that the next hour was going to be anything other than a careful, thorough examination of the available evidence. She let it adjust to the pace she was setting. Then she looked up. "Approximately 2 hours ago, you testified under oath in this courtroom." She looked at Kowalski directly. "You remember your testimony, Officer Kowalski." This was not a question. She had stopped phrasing it as one. His jaw worked. Nothing came out. "I'll take that as a yes." She opened the folder. "You stated that I was dressed in a manner inconsistent with court personnel. You stated I was carrying fraudulently obtained documents. You stated I became verbally aggressive and then physically combative. You stated that your body camera malfunctioned before the encounter began." She looked up. "Those were your statements, given under oath in this room, approximately 2 hours ago." Garrett, who had spent the recess on the phone with someone who had apparently given him information to understand what he'd walked into, put a hand on his client's arm and said, "Your Honor, I'd like to request." "I'm not asking your client to respond yet," Diana said. "I'm asking if he remembers what he said, if he recalls the specific content of testimony he gave under oath, rough 2 hours ago." She looked at Kowalski. "Yes," Kowalski said. The word came out with the quality of something being dragged out from somewhere it had been trying to stay. "Good." She reached under the bench and produced the tablet computer that Frank had brought up along with the robe. "Let's look at some evidence that came to my attention during the recess." She angled the tablet toward the courtroom. On its screen, a grid of 6 video feeds. different angles, different distances, all of them showing the same physical location, the public sidewalk and main entrance approach of this courthouse this morning. Courthouse security camera footage, Diana said. This building has 15 exterior cameras with coverage of all approach points and entrances. Several of them have unobstructed lines to the main entrance. Chief Judge Barbara Grayson, acting on a request I made during the recess, has already directed the courthouse security office to copy this footage and store it in multiple locations simultaneously. It is no longer accessible only in one place. She paused to let the specific information settle. Kowalski understood what it meant. She could see him understand it. The small remaining option, the possibility that footage might message through administrative channels or might experience the same malfunction his body camera had experienced, had just been permanently removed. She pressed play. The footage ran without narration. On the screen, a woman in a navy blazer walking at a consistent pace on a public sidewalk, a briefcase in her hand, nothing erratic. Nothing that could be characterized by any reasonable observer as aggressive or suspicious. Just a person walking toward the building where she worked. A uniformed officer stepping forward to intercept her. An exchange. Brief, the body language of the officer, and visible and clear from the camera angle, telegraphing something that had an edge to it that predated the conversation. And then, the room produced a sound, not a word. The involuntary sound of a collection of people watching something that should not be happening. Diana let the footage run until the moment the handcuffs were applied. Then she paused it. Officer Kowalski, please show me the moment in this footage where the detained individual became verbally aggressive. The room was quiet. Please point to the physical combativeness you described in your testimony. The room remained quiet. Please identify specific observable behavior in this footage that constitutes legal justification for the use of force that is shown here. Your Honor, Garrett started. Your client testified under oath in this room 2 hours ago, Diana said. He gave this court a specific account of what happened at the front entrance this morning. This footage shows what happened at the front entrance this morning. I am giving him the opportunity to reconcile those two accounts. She looked at Kowalski. Take whatever time you need. The time passed. Kowalski said nothing because there was nothing to say. Diana swiped to a second file. 8 months ago, she said. This county implemented a new mandatory protocol for officer body cameras. Every 60 seconds, all active body camera footage is automatically uploaded to a county-managed backup server. The protocol was implemented following an incident in which significant evidence was lost when a body camera was claimed to have suffered a malfunction at a relevant moment. The purpose of the protocol was to ensure that no such loss could occur in future. She looked at Kowalski. Officer Kowalski, were you aware that this protocol existed? The gray on in his face taps on a deeper register. This is the backup from your body camera from this morning, Diana said. Automatically uploaded to the county server at 8:46 a.m., approximately 60 seconds before you made contact with me at the main entrance. She pressed play. His voice filled the room, not the prepared, modulated voice from the witness stand, the unguarded voice from a moment before he was performing. The voice of a man alone with a camera he had forgotten was still transmitting. Look at this, walking right through like she owns the place. A pause, footsteps beginning. Not today. The stillness that came over the room after those words was different from what had come before. Not the stillness of shock. The stillness of people going back through hours of testimony, supporting testimony, and reassigning meaning to everything they had heard. Reconstructing the morning with different information in place. Diana stopped the playback. Officer Kowalski, you testified that your body camera malfunctioned this morning. She let 3 full seconds pass. The county backup server received uploads from your camera at 8:46 a.m., 8:47 a.m., 8:48 a.m., and 8:49 a.m. At 8:51 a.m., the uploads stopped. The detention had already occurred, and you were already inside this building by 8:51. She set the tablet face down on the bench. Your camera did not malfunction. You turned it off. You turned it off after the relevant footage had already been transmitted to a server you didn't know existed, containing a system you didn't know had been implemented 8 months ago. Garrett had his head in his hand. Not dramatically. Not a performance. Just a man doing arithmetic and not finding any number he liked. She opened the manila folder. "Let's discuss your record, Officer Kowalski." The same tone she'd used to say, "Let's discuss the schedule," or "Let's review the timeline." Not charged, not prosecutorial. The tone of a person who does this work every day and is doing it again now. In 15 years of service with this department, you have been the subject of 47 formal complaints submitted to Internal Affairs. 47 over 15 years, which is an average exceeding 3 complaints per year. She turned to the first tabbed section. Every one of those 47 complaints was marked unsubstantiated by Internal Affairs. Not 32, not 41, every single one. The same finding 47 times across 15 years. She let the number exist in the room for a moment. I've also reviewed your testimony record in this court specifically over the past 5 years. During that period, you appeared in this courtroom to give testimony 43 times. I want to be clear that I'm speaking only about cases that came before this court, not your complete testimony record across all venues. Of those 43 appearances here, 28 involved defendants who were Black or Latino. She turned to the next tabbed section. In those 28 cases, the language you used to characterize defendant behavior during arrest was, to an extent that reasons coincidence as an explanation, consistent across different dates, different defendants, different circumstances. She read from the file directly, verbally aggressive, refused to comply with lawful direction, became physically combative without provocation. I was required to use minimum necessary force to ensure public safety. The individual claimed to be someone important to avoid accountability. She set the page down on the bench. The same language, Officer Kowalski. Different faces, different names, different years, the same words. Near the door, Reeves shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Simmons was looking at the floor with the focused attention of someone who has decided the floor is the safest place to direct their eyes. Neither of them was looking at Kowalski. Diana noticed this. She filed it. Prosecutor Ashton. Ashton had been sitting at the state's table with both hands flat on the surface. She looked up. Your name appears in the case files for 11 of those 28 matters. 11 times over the past 5 years, your office received evidence from Officer Kowalski and proceeded to prosecution on the basis of that evidence. Ashton, I have one question, Diana said. In the course of those 11 cases, was your office aware of the pattern in Officer Kowalski's complaint record? Ashton closed her mouth. Then, I relied on the Internal Affairs findings. Each complaint had been reviewed and found unsubstantiated, Diana said. Yes, we've established what the Internal Affairs findings said. She looked at Ashton for a moment, and there was something in the look that was not unkind. You'll want to speak with independent counsel before we go much further. That's a recommendation, not an instruction. Ashton's hands stayed flat on the table. She stopped speaking. Officer Freevesby. He came to attention by reflex. The automatic posture of someone who's spent enough years in uniforms that a certain kind of address produces a physical response without the intermediate step of conscious decision. This morning you testified that Officer Kowalski handled the situation with remarkable professionalism. That's an accurate summary of your testimony. Reeves looked at Kowalski. Looked away from Kowalski. Yes, Your Honor. You were present at the main entrance during the detention? Yes, Your Honors. Having viewed the security camera footage just now, do you wish to amend anything in your earlier testimony? A pause long enough to count. 3 seconds. For Your Honor, Reeves said. I want to request an attorney. That, Diana said, is the first accurate assessment of what's needed in this room all morning. She moved on before the air could fully settle after that. Officer Simmons. He brought his eyes up from the floor. You recorded this incident on your personal phone. That recording is currently on your device. Before you leave this building today, you will surrender that device to the court clerk." She paused. "This is a ruling, not a request, not a recommendation." Simmons reached into his jacket pocket and placed his phone on the nearest flat surface, with the care of someone placing something delicate somewhere they're not sure is safe. Diana looked at it sitting there for a moment. Then she looked at the room as a whole. The lawyers, the court clerk, the reporters whose transcript of this session was going to be read by a significant number of people. Dara Wynn in the back row, notebook open again, writing with the focused certainty of someone who has understood that she is present at something that should be documented exactly as it occurred. "There's one more thing," Diana said. She set down the folder, folded her hands on top of it. The gesture she made when she was about to say something she wanted the room to be fully present for. 6 months ago, this court began a coordinating relationship with the FBI's Civil Rights Division regarding an investigation into patterns of drug-motivated misconduct within this police department. This investigation has been ongoing. It has not been public. Your name has appeared in the preliminary findings of that investigation on multiple occasions, Officer Kowalski, based on the arrest pattern and complaint record I've just described." A sound went through the room again. Garrett was on his feet. "Your Honor, my client has not been notified of any pending federal." "He wasn't supposed to be notified," Diana said. "That's how investigations under active development work. That's specifically why they remain non-public." This morning's incident, which includes a documented assault on a federal judicial officer in the exercise of her official duties, has been referred to the FBI as a probable civil rights violation. That referral was made during the recess. The investigation that was already underway has now been formally connected to the events of this morning. She had been watching Kowalski while she said this. She watched him process the information in pieces. The 6-month investigation, the connection to this morning, the federal referral, each piece adding to the weight of what he was carrying until she could see the weight of it in his posture, in the way his shoulders had changed, in the fact that at the table dead she had grabbed earlier was still in his grip. "You told this court this morning that people like me need to learn that actions have consequences," Diana said. "I was sitting right there when you said it." She indicated the defendant's table without looking at it. "You were correct about that. Actions do have consequences." "I didn't know," Kowalski said, low, almost inaudible. But the room was quiet enough. Diana heard it. "No," she said. "You didn't know because you didn't look. You saw a black woman in civilian clothes walking toward a courthouse where she has worked for 23 years, and you decided who she was before she said a word, before she had the opportunity to say a word." She paused. "That decision, made in a moment before you even moved toward her, is the thing that generated everything that followed." She picked up the gavel, held it for a moment without using it, but "I need to say something about the other people." The 47 individuals who filed complaints and were told their complaints were unsubstantiated. The people whose names are in the case files I've described today. They didn't have a robe to put on this morning. They didn't have 23 years of federal service and a credential wallet with a judicial seal. They had the truth of what happened to them and the documented word of an officer who had learned that the system would accept his version of events over theirs every time, because the system had been doing exactly that for 15 years without interruption. She set the gavel down. The truth was not enough for them, because nobody in this system required it to be enough. That is what I will spend the rest of my career working to change. She looked at the room. Court will recess. When we reconvene, address a significant procedural matter before this case moves to its next phase. The gavel came down. One clean sound. Not loud, just definitive. Dara Wynn stayed in her seat while everyone else moved. She watched Kowalski's lawyer pull him to a far corner and begin talking fast and low. She watched Reeves and Simmons move to opposite sides of the room like two objects that have stopped being able to occupy the same space. She watched Ashton sit at the table without moving, looking at the middle distance, with the expression of a person who is doing very complicated mental accounting about the past 11 cases. She looked at the empty bench. She thought about her first week of the internship, the orientation materials, the one-page biographies of each judge. Diana Caldwell's had been the longest, 2 paragraphs, Harvard Law, 8 years as a federal prosecutor in the Civil Rights Division, 23 years on the federal bench. She had read it and thought impressive the way you think impressive about a resume before the person attached to it has become real to you. She had not imagined that 8 months later she would send a text message to a bailiff to say, "Get in here right now," because she had recognized that same person's voice while that person was sitting at a defendant's table in handcuffs. She thought about the 4 seconds before she sent the text, the fear of doing something that couldn't be undone, the specific pull of the easier choice, which was to put her head back down and finish the filing summary, and let whatever was happening at the front of the room be someone else's situation to handle. She had sent the text anyway, and what she understood now, watching the room that had resulted from that choice, was that the fear before the choice and the choice itself were separate things. The fear was real, and it was fine, and it didn't have to determine the outcome. You could be afraid and still do the thing. You could feel the 4 seconds fully and still press send at the end of them. She opened her notebook to a fresh page and began writing while every detail was still precisely present. In the anteroom off the judicial corridor, Diana Caldwell sat alone for 10 minutes. She had asked Frank for 10 minutes, and he had not asked why, because he understood why without being told, and he had closed the door behind him, and she heard his footsteps move down the hallway, and then there was just the room. Quiet, small, a folding chair and a narrow table and fluorescent lighting and no window. The bruise on her left cheek was throbbing with a steady, metronomic ache. She had been managing around it for the past hour and a half, noting it the way you note a sound that's been present long enough to become background. Now, alone, she pressed 2 fingers gently against it and held them there. Let herself feel it. Her mother had told her, more than once, in different versions of the same instruction, don't run from a thing that's already happened. You can't outrun it. It travels with you. Better to stop and let it arrive and deal with it right where you're standing. Eleanor Caldwell had cleaned other people's houses for 30 years. She had gotten Diana through undergraduate school and then law school on the money from other people's housework. And she had never once, not in a single conversation, suggested that this was a sacrifice or a burden or anything other than what she had chosen to do, because it was what needed doing. She'd arrived at Diana's law school graduation in the blue dress she saved for occasions. She'd stood in the reception line afterward and said to the dean, quietly and without particular emphasis, "That's my daughter." The dean had smiled in the practiced way of someone processing a long line and moved on. Her mother had turned to Diana and said, "He has no idea what he just looked at." Diana had laughed. She remembered the laugh exactly, the lightness of it. "That's all right. Not today, when it counts." Diana had spent 32 years figuring out which moments were the counting ones, which fights were worth the cost of fighting them. Which rooms were the ones where you could afford to hold your ground? She thought she was about to find out whether this was one. She stood, straightened the robe, picked up the gavel. 10 minutes was enough. When Diana walked back into room Phi for the second time that morning, she stood at the front of the room before going to the bench. She stood there long enough for looking to settle into something else, into attention. Into the understanding that whatever was coming next was going to require everyone present to be fully present for it. Then she sat down. "Before we proceed to the next phase of this matter," she said, "there is a procedural issue I need to address directly and on the record." Garrett's head came up. His expression had the careful neutrality of a man who had been surprised too many times this morning to make assumptions about what was coming. "I am the victim of the assault at the center of this case. That is not a debatable characterization. It is documented on video, supported by physical evidence, and confirmed by my own testimony as the complaining party." She paused. Under judicial ethics standards, a judge cannot preside over sentencing in a matter where she is also the complaining victim. The conflict of interest is direct and unambiguous. I am therefore formally recusing myself from the sentencing phase of these proceedings. The room recalibrated. Kowalski's head had been down. It came up. There was something in his eyes in that moment, the beginning of a calculation, the first edge of a thought about what this might mean. Garrett put a hand on Kowalski's arm immediately. Don't. Whatever you're thinking right now, don't. Because Garrett had understood about 15 minutes into this proceeding that the woman on that bench was several moves ahead of everyone else in the room, and had been since the moment she walked through the chamber door, and whatever Kowalski was about to hope for, the hope was misplaced. I want to be precise about what recusal means in this context, Diana said. It does not mean this case is closed or diminished. The evidence is what it is. The footage exists and is secured. The complaint record exists. The testimony from this morning exists, both mine and the testimony given under oath before I returned to this bench. The referral to the FBI exists. She looked at Kowalski directly. None of those things are affected by my recusal. The only thing that changes is who is sitting in this seat when the final determination is made. She opened her case notes and say something about why I'm doing this. Not as an explanation to this court. The ethics rules don't require one. But because it matters that it be said clearly. She put down the pen. I have required the procedures in this court for 23 years. I have required officers to follow procedures. I have required attorneys to follow procedures even when following them was inconvenient, and even when they believed the outcome would be better if the procedures were set aside. The legitimacy of what happens in this room depends entirely on the consistent application of the rules to everyone who enters it. She paused. The moment I decide that the rules apply differently to me than to everyone else who has sat at that table, I become the very thing this case is about. I will not do that. She placed 3 calls from the bench, all of them on speaker as part of the record. The first call was to Chief Judge Barbara Grayson. Grayson picked up before the second ring in a way that said she had been waiting for the call. She had already been in contact with the federal judiciary's administrative office. She had a name, Judge Howard Fenn, serving in the neighboring federal district. No prior connection to any party, witness, or case involved in the matter before the court. Available and willing to convene formal proceedings the following Thursday morning, which it would give both the defense and the FBI coordination office adequate time to prepare. Thursday morning is acceptable, Diana said. Diana, Grayson said. Her voice had a quality that wasn't in her administrative voice. Are you all right? I'm doing the work, Diana said. That's where I am right now. A pause, then Thursday morning. I'll have it confirmed within the hour. The call ended. The second call was to the county district attorney. Not to Claire Ashton's unit, to the DA himself directly, to notify him formally, and on the record that a member of his staff had been present and active during proceedings that were now the subject of federal review, and that said staff member required independent legal counsel before any further participation in the matter. The D said 3 things during the call. Yes, understood, and I'll handle it. None of them with any additional elaboration. The call lasted 4 minutes. The third call was to the FBI office coordinator she had been working with for 6 months, a woman named Agent Prather, who answered on the first ring with a tone that suggested she, too, had been watching her phone since the morning. Diana put that call on speaker and let it run. Kowalski heard his own spoken by a federal agent in the specific context of an active civil rights investigation. He heard the phrase coordinating federal referral. He heard the phrase this morning's events have been formally connected to the ongoing matter. She watched his face while the call continued, watched the thing that had been holding him up. The accumulated weight of 15 years of certainty that the system always calibrated in his direction, that the process bent toward people who wore the badge, that the complaints got filed and got marked and got forgotten, because that was what complaints did. Watched it give way. not all at once. From the inside first. The way a building actually fails, the internal structure shifting before anything changes on the surface. When the call ended, Diana looked at Kowalski for what she understood would be the last time in her capacity as the presiding judge in this matter. You're going to spend the next several days making decisions with your attorney, she said. The federal investigation proceeds regardless of those decisions. The evidence is already secured and in multiple locations. The footage is already in federal hands. She paused. But before this case moves to Judge Fenn's jurisdiction, I want to say something that isn't about statute or procedure. She looked at him. I walked toward this building this morning thinking about yellow flowers, about the cemetery I was planning to visit this evening, and what flowers my mother had liked and whether I'd remember to stop for them on the way. That was what was in my head when you stepped in front of me. Not a case, not a ruling, not 8 months of evidence you felt I had wrongly suppressed. Just flowers. She let that be plain. That's what I was doing. That's what every person you have stopped and detained and arrested over 15 years was doing. Living their life. Going somewhere. Thinking about something ordinary. Not thinking about you. Kowalski's eyes were on the table. The difference between me and them is not intelligence or character or anything that belongs to either of us. The difference is that I had a robe I could put back on, a credential with a federal seal, a bench with my name on it, and a bailiwick who had known my face for 12 years. She paused. They had the truth of what happened to them. And for 15 years, in this system, the truth was not enough. Because you had learned, and the system had confirmed for you 47 times that you had learned correctly, that your version would be accepted over theirs. She picked up the gavel. That is the thing I intend to spend whatever professional time I have left working to make untrue. She brought it down. Court is hereby transferred to federal jurisdiction. Defendant remanded to custody pending proceedings before Judge Fenn beginning Thursday morning. All evidence in this matter is formally entered into the federal record and placed under court seal. Officers Reeves and Simmons, you have the right to counsel before any further proceedings, and I would encourage you to exercise that right today, not tomorrow. She set the gavel down. We're adjourned. One clean sound when it came down, and Diana Caldwell stood, collected her papers, and walked back through the chamber door without looking behind her. What happened over the following days moved with the particular momentum of machinery that has finally been something to do that it was designed for. Garrett met with Kowalski in a private room at the detention facility that same evening. The conversation took 4 hours. When it was finished, Kowalski had made a decision, not from remorse. Diana had thought about that in the days that followed, and she believed it clearly. The decision did not come from remorse. It came from arithmetic. Garrett laid out the numbers without softening them, because softening them would not have helped his client. And Garrett was a lawyer who understood the difference between comfort and service. The civil rights violation under federal statute, up to 10 years. Assault on a federal judicial officer in performance of her duties, 5 years mandatory minimum, consecutive not concurrent. Perjury given under oath in federal proceedings, up to 5 additional years, stack them as charged. Do the arithmetic, or give the FBI what they had been building toward for 6 months and had not quite been able to fully reach. Describe in detail the 3 supervisors who had reviewed 47 complaint files and signed their names to 47's unsubstantiated findings across 15 years. Describe the understanding that had existed between Kowalski and these supervisors. The understanding that was never written down, never formally comprehended, just mutually comprehended, the way concerns are comprehended between people who have found a workable arrangement and see no reason to examine it too carefully. Captain Richard Harlow, Lieutenant George Bruder, Sergeant Dale Vance. 3 names. 15 years of signatures on forms that said nothing happened when something had happened. Kowalski gave them all before midnight Tuesday, not because he had reckoned with anything about himself, because the math was simple and his alternatives were not. The FBI had all three men in separate rooms. By Wednesday morning, each one unaware the other two had been called in, each one therefore operating without the benefit of a coordinated story. The conversations those three men had on Wednesday were among the most productive 4-hour blocks Agent Prather's office had experienced in several years. Diana was not present for any of it. That was not her role. She had done what her role permitted and required. The rest belonged to the federal process she had spent 6 months helping to build, and that was now running without needing her hand on it. Thursday morning. Judge Howard Fenn convened the formal proceedings in the main federal courtroom on the 4th floor. Not room 4B, the 4th floor courtroom, larger, higher ceiling, morning light coming in from the east windows. Diana sat at the witness stand for 2 hours and 41 minutes. She answered every question she was asked, completely, factually. When asked about the events at the main entrance, she described them with the precision of someone who had spent the hours between Tuesday and Thursday organizing her recollection into exactly what she had observed and experienced, without elaboration or editorializing, the way she had required witnesses to describe things in her own courtroom for 23 years. When Fenn's clerk asked, after the evidentiary presentation, if she wished to make a statement to the court before sentencing deliberations, she declined. "The evidence is complete," she said. "I don't have anything to add to it." Fenn looked at her over the top of his glasses for a moment, a measuring look. Then he nodded once and moved on. Kowalski's cooperation with the federal investigations reduced the civil rights charge. It did not eliminate it. The assault on a federal judicial officer carried its mandatory minimum without reduction. The perjury charge ran concurrent. The final total, 11 years in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release upon completion, loss of pension, surrender of badge. When the sentence was read, Kowalski was sitting very still. He had used whatever remaining stillness he had to absorb it. He did not speak. He had said everything he's going to say in the room with Garrett on Tuesday evening, and none of it had been for the benefit of anyone in this courtroom. His handcuffs were applied. He was walked to the door. Diana watched him go. She was aware, in the way you become aware of things you've tried to set aside, that he was 42 years old. When his sentence was complete, he would be 53. She let herself stay with that for the full duration of the walk to the door. Thought about what it meant without trying to decide what to feel about it. Then she let it go. Not because it wasn't worth thinking about. Because there was other work to do, and the work required her full attention. And she had learned, a long time ago, that the weight of what had happened to her was real and hers to carry. But it could not be the only thing she carried if she intended to keep working. The investigation did not end with Kowalski. Harlow, Bruder, and Vance were indicted at federal charges in the 3rd week of November. Obstruction of justice. Conspiracy to deprive civil rights under color of law. Their trials were scheduled for the following year. Those proceedings would take 8 months and would produce the kind of courtroom record that law school courses use for the next decade as a case study in what institutional complicity looks like when it is finally documented. Reeves accepted a negotiated plea. Termination, demotion of retirement classification, 3 years of probation. His cooperation in the federal investigation corroborated every material element of Kowalski's account of the supervisory structure and added several details the FBI had not yet confirmed from other sources. He cried during his deposition. Not performatively. The cry of a man who had spent enough across the table from the weight of his own choices that it had eventually broken through whatever he'd been using to hold it back. Diana was not present for that deposition. She learned of the crying from Agent Prather, who mentioned it as a matter of factual record rather than as something that required interpretation. Simmons's personal phone footage became Exhibit 14 in the federal case against Harlow, Bruder, and Vance, where it was used to demonstrate the operational climate that those supervisors created and maintained. His attorney, in a deposition filing that somehow became semi-public, described it as the most self-defeating piece of evidence he had encountered in 20 years of practice. Simmons lost his position, his certification, and his ability to seek employment in law enforcement within the state. Claire Ashton was placed on administrative leave in the week following the Tuesday. A review of the 11 cases in which her office had prosecuted, based on Olski's, was assigned to an independent panel. That review would take 11 months. At its conclusion, 7 of the 11 cases were found to involve prosecutorial reliance on evidence that the panel termed Ashton's office should have subjected to greater scrutiny. 2 of those 7 resulted in civil suits. Ashton did not face criminal charges, but she did not return to her position as a prosecutor. 432 names. That was the number. The investigative team, working through Kowalski's plea arrest and testimony record across all venues and cross-references case outcomes, arrived at 432 individuals whose cases showed evidence of having been materially affected by his conduct. Charges that should not have been brought, evidence that should not have been admitted. Testimony the record now showed was inconsistent with documented facts. Some of these cases were straightforward, records that had not been expunged despite charges being dropped. This expungement required a form and a signature and a court order, and Diana signed them without ceremony, one after another, understanding that behind each signature was a person who had carried something on their record that should not have been there and who would now not carry it. Some were complicated, convictions that required formal appeals, people who had served time, people whose employment, house custody arrangements, and family relationships had been altered by the existence of a record that should never have existed. Each of those required more lawyers, motions, hearings, time measured in months rather than weeks. Diana was not the one doing most of this work directly. She was the judge. She signed orders and ruled on and did the things her situation allowed and required. Direct casework belonged to the public, defenders, and the civil rights attorneys, and the teams that had been assembled specifically for this process. So she had read the list. All 432 entries. She had read it the night Grayson's office sent it over, sitting at her desk at 11:30 p.m., with the rest of the building empty, and she had read it slowly, not efficiently, not looking for patterns or summaries, just reading it, name by name. Trained to hold the fact of each one as a person rather than as a data point. She kept a copy in the top drawer of her desk at Chambers, not filed, not organized with the other administrative materials. Just there, loose, so that when she opened the drawer she saw it, so she would remember what the numbers were made of. Rosa Guerrero was 67 years old. She lived in a small house on the east side of the city. She had lived there for 31 years, since before the neighborhood had changed around it in the ways neighborhoods change and change again. She had a garden in the back that she maintained herself, mostly tomatoes, and the herbs her mother had grown in a different garden in a different city a long time ago. 15 years ago, Ray Kosolski had stopped her car 2 blocks from her house on a Tuesday evening in September. He told her she matched a description. She had been driving home from her sister's house with a back seat full of groceries. She did not match any description. There was no description. She had been stopped because she was driving a 10-year-old car in a direction that led toward a neighborhood Kosolski had decided she was going to or coming from rather than living in. He arrested her. She spent 11 hours in a holding cell before her daughter, frantic and making calls from a phone that was running out of battery, found a lawyer who could secure her receipts. The charges, disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, were dropped within a month because there was nothing supporting them. But the arrest remained on her record. For 3 years, it caused her difficulties she measured in the specific material terms of a job she didn't get and a housing application that was complicated, and an afternoon spent at her grandchild's school explaining to an administrator why there was an arrest on her background check for a job she was trying to volunteer for. She had filed a complaint with Internal Affairs, unsubstantiated. She had not filed another one. The call came on a Wednesday morning in November. A woman from the Public Defender's Coordinating Office, not Diana. The call was made through proper channels, because this was how the process worked, through appropriate representatives following appropriate procedure. The woman said, "Your case is being formally reopened for review. Your complaint has been connected to an active federal investigation. You will have the opportunity to provide a full statement and to be heard." Rosa Guerrero sat at her kitchen table after the call ended with the phone still in her hand and didn't move for a while. Her daughter came in from the hallway and saw her mother sitting there and asked if she was all right. Rosa said, "They believe me now." Her daughter said, "What?" Rosa said, "They believe me. I filed that complaint 15 years ago and they told me nothing happened and now they believe me." She said it quietly. Not triumphant, not bitter, though she would have had every right to either. Just quiet. The quality of relief that comes from waiting long enough that you had begun to stop expecting it. The relief that feels smaller and stranger than you'd imagined it would when you were still waiting. More like sitting down than like anything that could reasonably be called victory, but real, entirely real. Her daughter sat down at the table next to her without saying anything. She understood that sitting down was the right response. Sometimes it is. Six weeks after the Tuesday, Frank Okafor knocked on the door of Diana's office on the 4th floor. The door was open, as it generally was during office hours, but Frank always knocked on the frame. 12 years, and he had always knocked on the frame. It was a habit from early in his time at the courthouse, a decision to respect the threshold that had simply stayed in place. "Come in, Frank." He came to the doorway, leaned against the frame in the way he leaned when he was going to stay for a few minutes, but wasn't going to take a seat. He was 61 years old and had a knee that had been giving him difficulty since the previous August and had still taken the stairs at a pace that still surprised him when he thought about it. "How are you doing?" he asked. She looked up from the file she had been reviewing. "Good days and harder days," she said. He nodded. It was an honest answer. He had worked in a building full of lawyers for 12 years and understood exactly how rare honest answers were and how they sounded different from other kind, he said. "The bruise is gone," he said, "healed a few weeks ago." She touched her left cheek briefly, automatically. Nothing there now, nothing visible. "Sometimes I forget it happened," she said. "And then sometimes in the morning it comes back to me clearly before I'm fully awake, and I have to sit with it for a few minutes before I can move on with the day." "Yeah," Frank said, looking at the floor between them. "Same." She looked at him. "Frank, you didn't do anything wrong. I wasn't at the front entrance, Frank." The way she said names when she needed someone to hear her. "You came when Dorothy thus messaged. You went up three flights of stairs and came back in 9 minutes with my robe and my gavel. You announced me correctly. You did what you were there to do, and it mattered. Don't spend another minute on the other part." He was quiet for a moment.
"There is something else."
"She is," Diana agreed.
"She asked me to pass something along to you."
He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a folded piece of paper. "From a paper she's been working on. Said to give it to you if I thought you'd want to see it." She took it, unfolded it. A single paragraph marked in the margin with a word in pencil, conclusion. She read it. "The events of this Tuesday place that institutional failure is not simply an absence of rules. It is a failure to require that rules apply consistently to everyone who enters a system, regardless of what that person looks like, or what position they hold, or whether they are wearing the credentials that make their belonging visible. What changed on that Tuesday was not the existence of rules. The rules were always there. What changed was that a sequence of small choices made correctly by people inside the system at specific moments when those choices could have gone another way, forced the rules to apply to someone who had built a career on the assumption that they wouldn't apply to him. A woman chose not to react the way that was expected of her. A young intern chose to send a text message rather than return to her work. A bailiff chose to run offensive stairs. None of these were heroic choices in any conventional sense. They were just correct choices, made at the right moment by people who recognized that the moment required something of them and decided to give it. The lesson is not that the system redeemed itself. The system did not redeem itself. The lesson is that people within a system can, in specific moments and under real pressure, choose to do what the system requires but cannot compel. That distinction is not minor. It is, in fact, everything. Diana refolded the paper slowly. "She's going to be very good at this," she said. Frank's smile was the real kind. Told her the same thing. He left a few minutes later, and Diana sat at her desk with the folded paper for a moment before placing it in the top drawer next to the list of 432 names. She closed the drawer, went back to the file she had been reviewing. There was still work to do. There was always still work to do. That was the nature of the job, and she had understood it since before she took the oath, and it had never stopped being true in 23 years, and she did not expect it to stop being true now. She kept working until the light through the east went the color of late afternoon. Then she put on her coat, picked up her keys, and drove to the grocery store. Sa stopped near the door, at the display that got restocked on Fridays. She pointed at the yellow flowers. The cashier looked at the code and rang them in without asking what they were called. Diana folded receipt and put it in her coat pocket. She drove to Whitmore Road. It was later than she'd been planned. Later, by nearly 9 hours than she had intended when she chose the Jezer that morning and thought about coming here in the evening. The cemetery closed to vehicle at dusk, but the walking paths stayed accessible, and she knew the route without needing the lights that lined the main path. She had walked it enough times in enough kinds of light that her feet knew the turns. The slight incline before the section where her mother's stone was. She had had a bench installed there 3 years ago. Simple iron. Her mother would have said it was too much. Her mother said that about most things. She crouched down and placed the yellow flowers against the base of the stone. Eleanor May Caldwell, 1941-2009. She carried us all. She sat on the bench. October had turned fully cold while she had been inside the building for most of the day. Her breath was visible. The sky was the dark of a city night, not fully black, the ambient glow of the streets giving it an orange undertone at the horizon. She sat and let the day run through her. Not in order. In the way things actually arrive when you let them arrive rather than managing their arrival. The closet, the blazer, the decision that had started from something ordinary that's become something else entirely by 8:47 a.m. The stone wall of the courthouse against her shoulder blades. Frank's face when he'd walked into room 4B. The footage playing on the tablet screen. Kolsky's voice saying, "Not today." Rosa Guerrero asking they believe me now. In a kitchen she hadn't been in, with a tone she had only been able to imagine, she thought about Dara Wynn's paragraph. The system did not redeem itself. People within the system chose at specific moments to do what the system requires, but cannot compel. She thought about her mother saying, "Not today." When it counts. She had spent 32 years trying to understand which moments were the counting ones. She had made peace, somewhere in the middle of those 32 years, with the fact that you usually couldn't identify them in advance. You could only be ready when they arrived, and then you either were ready or you weren't, based on everything you'd done with the years before. She had been ready. That was the thing she sat with, finally, in the cold and the quiet. Not pride, exactly. Something quieter than pride and more durable. The knowledge that when the moment arrived, she had done what needed to be done with it. That she had not broken when breaking would have been understandable. That she had followed the rules even when she had the power to set them aside. That she had walked back into that room, not to use her position as a weapon, but to use it as a tool. The way it was supposed to be used, the way she had sworn to use it. Her mother had carried things her whole life without being asked whether the weight was fair. She had carried them because they needed to be carried, and she was the one who was there. Diana sat on the iron bench that her mother would have said was too much and thought, I know, Mama, I know. She did not say it out loud. Eleanor Caldwell had not needed things said out loud. She had understood them in the space, before words, the way mothers sometimes do, the way this particular mother always had. Diana stayed until the cold was fully in her hands, and her coat wasn't quite keeping up with it. Then she stood, adjusted her coat, looked at the headstone one more time. Yet the yellow flowers against the base of it, the ones with no name she'd ever learned. She walked back to the car. The receipt was on the passenger seat. Yellow flowers the cashier had typed. Price and date and time, 9:52 p.m. She folded it carefully and put it in her coat pocket alongside the other one. She sat in the car for a moment without starting it. The cemetery was quiet with the specific quality of places that are kept quiet deliberately, maintained as spaces where the ordinary noise of the world is held back by something more than just distance. She started the car, drove home. She wore the robe the next morning, not as a statement, not as a reclamation, not because anything needed to be announced or demonstrated, just because it was Wednesday and she had cases on the docket beginning at 9, and the robe was what the work required, and the work required showing up prepared to do it. She had a contract dispute that had been in her courtroom for 7 months and was finally approaching resolution of sort. She had a motion hearing on a custody matter that she had been following carefully because the children involved were young and the adults around them were in conflict, and someone said to be paying close attention. In the afternoon, a pre-trial conference for a matter that was going to take most of November. She came in through the main entrance, not a side door. Not the garage. The main entrance up the stone steps past the place on the right side of the third step, where there had been a small cracks in the stone for at least 4 years. She had noticed it every morning for 4 years, and not reported it, and she was going to report it today. The bronze plates above the entrance. The Honorable Judge Diana Caldwell presiding. She didn't look at it on the way in. She knew what it said. She knew because she had read it twice one morning, 6 weeks ago, while standing against the wall of her own courthouse with someone's hand at her throat, and it had been the thing she held on to when there was nothing else to hold. She didn't need to look at it now. It was there. It said what it said. That was enough. Bernie said, "Good day, morning, Judge," on her way through security. She said, "Good day, Bernie," back and kept walking. The coffee machine on the 3rd floor, black, no sugar. The same every morning for longer than she could remember making the decision to prefer it that way. She carried it down to chambers and sat at her desk with the morning's files. She opened the top drawer. The list was there. 432 names on paper. Some of the entries had been marked completed in the past 6 weeks as the review process moved forward. More remained. Most of them remained. This was work measured in months and years, not weeks, and she understood that going in, and she had made her peace with the pace required because the pace required was the pace that did it correctly, and doing it correctly was the whole point. She closed the drawer, put on her reading glasses, opened the 9 o'clock file, and began reading. At 8:58, she stood, straightened the robe, collected the file, and walked down the hallway toward her courtroom. The fluorescent light near room 7 was flickering. She made a note. For real this time, not a mental note. An actual note on the pad she carried. Light, hallway, room 7, 3 years. She underlined twice, put it in her jacket pocket. She pushed open the courtroom door. Frank Okafor said, "All rise." She walked in. She sat at her bench. The work began again.